We hear a lot about a future of exponential productivity, falling costs, and, shared abundance for everyone. It's an absolutely incredible vision laid out by thinkers like Ryan Lowe. But what if it's not a done deal? What could actually stop it? Or at the very least, put it on hold for a generation? Okay, let's really get into this.
So, this is really the big question we have to ask ourselves, isn't it? It's one thing to get excited about incredible new tech like AI and cheaper energy, for sure. But it's a whole other thing to just assume the path to get there is going to be some smooth, straight line. You see, the best arguments, the strongest ideas, are the ones that can be properly stress tested.
And that's exactly what the author does here. He makes a really powerful point. An argument that can't survive its own counterexamples, well, that's not really an argument, is it? It's just a preference, a wish. So he outlines 4 distinct failure modes. These are specific scenarios where this amazing, optimistic future could get seriously derailed. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with why this idea of stress testing is so important. Then we'll dive into 3 major failure modes: misguided economic policy, the capture of power at key choke points, and a slowdown in the energy transition. And finally, we'll look at why the ending to this whole story is still very much up for grabs. Okay, so let's be super clear. The point of this isn't to be a downer or to make us all feel helpless, not at all. It's about understanding the specific reasons why this whole abundance idea could fail or, maybe just show up in a much more lopsided way than we hope. It's about being prepared, not defeated. So with that in mind, let's look at the first place things could go sideways: our own economic institutions. So our first failure mode. This one doesn't require some big conspiracy. Nope. All it takes is a really predictable, almost automatic, institutional reflex. Just think of it like our economic immune system kind of overreacting to something new that it just doesn't recognize. So here's the core of the issue. Central banks, they're built to do 2 things: fight inflation and fight unemployment. That's their programming. So their gut instinct whenever they see prices fall is to smash that big red stimulus button. But what if prices are falling for a really good reason? Like because AI and robotics and cheap energy are just making everything way, way cheaper to produce? And this is where you see the whole chain reaction just play out. Step 1, technology makes things cheaper. Step 2, central banks misread the situation as a crisis and they cut interest rates. But this doesn't really boost the real economy because the private sector is already adopting just fine. Instead, all that cheap money just floods into financial assets, inflating bubbles. The result? The wealthy get wealthier, and the actual transition to real abundance gets stalled out for years in what looks like, a long period of really low economic growth. So, how do you spot this happening in the wild? What's the signal to watch for? Well, here it is. If you see prices falling, but people still have jobs, and the economy is actually still growing, and yet the central banks are still trying to pump stimulus into the system, that right there, that's the fingerprint. That's a sign this first failure mode is active. All right, let's move on. The next 2 failure modes are pretty closely related and, they're a bit more deliberate. This is where basic human incentives, to grab power and profits, come into the picture, and they could end up hoarding the benefits of abundance for just a few. Now, this is a really fascinating dynamic. Just think about it. When technology makes almost everything abundant and cheap, what happens to the value of the few things that are still scarce? Well, it skyrockets, right? These are the choke points. So control over things like AI compute infrastructure or proprietary data or the energy grids, it becomes unbelievably valuable. And this isn't some new story. We've seen this movie before, back in the Gilded Age, the exact same way that railroads, oil, and steel were the big choke points of the 19th century. Well, today we're seeing AI compute, proprietary models, and even things like regulatory frameworks becoming the new monopolies. And of course, the big players have every incentive to lobby for rules that protect their spot at the top. So the key thing here is to watch for these trends. Ask yourself, are just a handful of companies controlling all the AI training power? Are new regulations, the ones supposedly designed to protect the public, actually just making it impossible for new players to even compete? Are we seeing aggressive lawsuits trying to snuff out open source projects? Those are your signals. Okay, let's get to our third and final failure mode, and this one is the most grounded in the messy physical world. This is where those beautiful, smooth, exponential cost curves of technology slam right into the hard reality of steel and copper and concrete.
So much of this entire abundance idea really depends on energy costs continuing to plummet. That amazing downward trend predicted by things like Wright's Law. It's the super reliable principle that says for every time you double production, the cost drops by a predictable amount. The data has backed this up for decades. But projections, no matter how good they are just not guarantees. So what could actually get in the way? Well, there are three major roadblocks. First, building solar panels is getting way cheaper, but building the transmission lines and storage to actually get that power to our cities, that's not keeping up. Second, permitting and all the red tape can slow down projects for years. And third, our supply chains for critical stuff like lithium and cobalt are pretty fragile and can be messed up by geopolitics. So the signal to watch for here isn't just the price of a solar panel. No, it's about the gap. The gap between the cheap power we could be producing and what our grid can actually handle. If you see that gap getting wider and wider, it means the energy transition is stalling out.
Okay, so we've walked through all these potential ways things could go off the rails. Where does that leave us? Well, the author's conclusion is both subtle and really powerful. The underlying technological trend, the one pushing costs down, that's real, that's durable. But who actually benefits from it? Yeah, that part is not guaranteed at all. History shows us that these periods of high concentration, they can be reversed. But man, it is not easy. It's like a tug of war. On one side, you've got the forces of concentration, lobbying, regulatory capture, the sheer power of capital. But on the other side, you have forces for change, like an organized and productive class or new tech that makes the unfairness really obvious and, well, as a last resort, crisis. And this right here is probably the single most important takeaway from this whole thing. None of these failure modes actually stop the technology. The cost of solar doesn't suddenly go up because the grid is slow. AI doesn't stop getting better just because of some new regulation. No, the underlying trend keeps going. The critical point is that all this friction, it just delays the arrival of abundance, and it seriously messes with the distribution of who gets the gains.
And that leaves us with the final and maybe the most important question of all. It's not really if this transition to abundance happens, but which version of it we're going to get. The technology is on its way. The choices we're making right now, before the whole structure of this new economy gets locked in, will decide who captures the benefits. The real question is, are we paying close enough attention to make a difference?